Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a really interesting narrative and simulation framework for Unity. If you've ever had a dream for a story-rich game, but just got completely bogged down by the code, you're going to want to stick around for this.
And that right there, that's the entire promise of this framework. It's a tagline that speaks directly to a problem that, let's be honest, almost every indie developer or narrative designer has felt at some point. It's a real headache.
Okay, so let's get right into it. First, we need to really understand the problem we're trying to solve here. Because when you're making a story-driven game, especially in Unity, there are some pretty common and, frankly, universal challenges that pop up. I mean, if you've ever been there, you know exactly what this means. You find yourself tangled in this massive web of if statements, you're trying to track what the player has and hasn't done, and you're wishing your writer could just, build their own scenes without needing an engineer every 5 minutes. It's that constant friction between the creative vision and the technical reality. All right, so that's the problem. Now let's look at the solution this framework puts on the table. And it's not just a random collection of scripts either. It's actually built on a very specific and pretty powerful philosophy that totally changes how you'd approach this. This quote just nails it. It's the core idea. So instead of hiding your story away in code, or heaven forbid, a clunky spreadsheet, this framework uses scriptable objects. If you're not deep into Unity, just think of them as these neat little data containers that live right inside your project, just like a 3D model or a sound file. This means you can treat all your story bits, your events, your choices, your characters, like they're modular visual building blocks. So who is this actually for? Well, let's be clear, it's not trying to be the end-all be-all solution for some massive AAA studio. It's aimed squarely at solo devs, small teams, and especially narrative designers who want a really solid system for branching stories, but don't want to build that entire system from scratch on every single project. So the big question is, how does this all work under the hood? What are the actual gears that make this whole thing turn? Well, it really boils down to a super clear data structure and a very straightforward gameplay loop. And at the very heart of it all is this simple, kind of elegant loop that just drives the whole experience. An event pops up, the player makes a choice, the game figures out the consequences of that choice, and then the state of the world updates. And then the loop can start all over again. It's just clean, predictable, and actually really powerful. So let's break that loop down a bit, starting with the event. This is your fundamental building block for the story. You can think of it like a container for one single moment in your game. It holds the text, maybe some art or a background image, and most importantly, the list of choices the player gets to make. Okay, so from that event, you have your choices. These are the actual pathways that branch out. They're the buttons the player's going to click, the dialogue options they'll pick, and each one is its own self-contained object that links what the player did directly to a bunch of potential consequences. And the outcomes? Well, these are the verbs of your game. This is where the magic really happens, right? An outcome is the real, tangible result of what the player chose to do. It could be something simple, like gaining a resource like food, or getting a story flag like found the key, or it could even trigger a whole new secret event. Now, what's really clever about this architecture is how everything is so clearly separated. Each piece has one job, and it does it well. The game controller, it's the boss. It knows everything about the game state. The choice engine just handles choices. The simulation manager just deals with time. And having that clean division of labor is what makes the whole system easy to scale up and, trust me, much easier to debug. So what does all this technical architecture actually mean for the creative person, for the writer or designer? Well, let's look at the workflow it creates. It's a workflow that's really about wiring stories together, not just writing lines of code. This comparison chart really tells the whole story. You're making a fundamental shift. You're moving away from a process that's super code-heavy, often brittle, and pretty intimidating for non-programmers, and you're moving to one that's visual, data-driven, and modular. It's about building with blocks, not just with code. And this right here, this is the designer's command center. The narrative linker is a custom editor window where you visually connect everything. You can literally drag and drop to hook up an event to its choices. And then you just specify what each choice does using drop-downs and buttons. You can even do cool stuff like set probabilities for outcomes, creating these really interesting risk-reward scenarios with just a few clicks. Okay, so that's a lot of theory, but what can you actually build with this thing? To really show off how flexible it is, let's walk through a couple of quick recipes for two very different kinds of games. So first up, let's tackle a classic, the visual novel. Your goal is simple. You want scenes, dialogue choices, and branching paths that lead to different endings for your characters. How would you pull that off here? Well, the setup is actually surprisingly direct. Each scene in your story becomes one of those sim event objects we talked about. Each dialogue option for the player, that's a choice. And then the outcomes do all the heavy lifting for you. They can add a flag to track which character's route you're on, or they can modify a resource that you're using as an affection meter. The framework's pieces just map perfectly.
Okay, now let's flip the script completely. Let's imagine a survival sim, something with systems-driven gameplay, but you also want to weave in these cool narrative moments.
This example is where you really see the framework shine. The simulation manager can drive your whole day-night cycle. Your food and morale are just resource objects that your daily events can drain or refill. But here's the really cool part. The StoryArc manager can just sit there, watching for certain conditions. And when you finally find those batteries, bam, it can inject a major, handcrafted story moment right into that systemic loop. It's powerful stuff. So after looking at the problem, the architecture, and a couple of ways to use it, let's zoom out. What's the big takeaway here? Why should a developer even consider this kind of approach? So why does this all matter? It really comes down to speed and structure. You get incredibly fast iteration because your writers and designers can build and test story ideas on their own. You get structured branching, so you're managing all that complexity with tools actually built for the job, not just a mess of code. And on top of that, it's a production-ready extendable foundation. That means you're not starting from scratch, but you're also not locked into a rigid box. And that really is the question to leave you with. Think about it. So many amazing game ideas get stuck on the purely technical hurdle of building a narrative system from the ground up. A toolkit like this handles all that plumbing for you, and it frees you up, as the creator, to focus on the one thing that truly matters, the story you want to tell.